Aloha. Welcome to Maui EVA, or Maui Electric Vehicle Alliance, a project of the Maui College. Today, I'm very pleased to have an economist, Ann Jenny. She teaches economics, and she's also an economist by profession. And we're going to be talking about economics of electric vehicles, and at the end, give you a brief preview of our report to the Department of Energy. Please stay with us, and we'll be right back.
Discover your future through learning. With a Bachelor's of Applied Science degree, you'll be prepared for a career in the field of sustainable science management, engineering and technology, or applied business and information technology. Create sustainable communities. Engineer the next generation of technology. Develop the business expertise to succeed in a dynamic economic environment. Apply now at the University of Hawaii Maui College.
Welcome back to Maui EVA. Very pleased to have Ann Jenny, who teaches economics at Maui College. Ann Jenny, same as Ann Koo, but with Jenny last name, and who's worked at the U.S. Treasury before coming here to Maui. Ann, welcome to Maui EVA.
I am so honored to be here.
I can't wait to talk about economics with you, economics of EVs. And I discovered this marooned Leaf on campus, and then I called the dealer to find out who they sold it to. I was really happy to hear they sold it to you. It's not this Leaf that's showing on the screen.
Well, mine looks quite a bit like
quite a bit like that, right? And
it's dirtier.
It's dirtier. How long have you had? When did you get it, actually?
I got it in September.
In September.
And I have had more fun with it. They would call it the chili pepper.
The chili pepper. You gave your Leaf a name.
Of course. Yeah, I tend to be an early adopter of technology. I grew up in a family of engineers. I actually learned to fly before I learned to drive. So one of the issues that comes up with electric cars is the idea of range. And when you're flying, you have to take into consideration the winds and things, which is very much like taking into consideration the terrain that you drive in. So it wasn't that big of a deal for me. And I keep going, well, why are all these people worried about range? You just sort of plan ahead and you're fine.
You're fine. Well, I see as an early adopter, I see you have the latest mini iPad. Is that right?
Yes.
So I'm envious because I think that's just the right size.
Well, I had been looking for a tablet computer for many years before they had come out, and I have some of the first touchscreen computers.
Oh.
When my early career started in the Air Force, I was one of the first first women that was allowed to go into a non-traditional field.
Oh.
So they actually had me repairing things that I thought were science fiction. Like a low-light level television camera where the instructor put his hand on the wall, turned out the lights, and you could see his handprint glowing on the wall.
Oh my goodness.
And so not only did it exist, but I had to fix it.
Wow. So being an early adopter, not just of EVs, but of other technology, I suppose it's higher cost or higher risk?
There is definitely a risk.
Yeah?
I was an early fan of the Wankel engine, the rotary engine. Which was another technological advantage. The one issue with that was the materials technology was not up to the engineering technology. So the problems with the rotary engine, if people didn't put enough oil into it, and it tended to seem like it ate oil.
Right.
But it was a small, highly efficient, good torque, and the whole engine itself was much simpler than your standard internal combustion engine. And to me, from that perspective, it made a lot of sense. But it is something that really just never caught on.
But see, for a lot of people, they would say, well, why don't you just wait until the technology matures? Why be an early adopter? Why take all that risk and inconvenience, so to speak?
there's kind of the joy in exploration. If I was somebody that was willing to wait, I would not have joined the Air Force in 1976 and been the only female in all of these places where I was. I wouldn't have discovered the different countries that I got to live in. I wouldn't have come to Maui, for heaven's sake. You know, waiting for things to happen is not the way that I've ever chosen to live my life. I want to explore and experience for myself. I don't want somebody, when there's a speech on television, I watch the speech. I don't care what other people say that person has said. I want to experience it for myself. You want to experience,
okay, to be the first. So as a pioneer in many ways, too.
Yeah.
So, gosh, and talk about early adopters. I actually say the next photo really says it all. Our project, EVs in Paradise. It's unheard of in the world.
Yes.
I think that's one of the reasons we won this Department of Energy grant, to say, hey, we want to bring EVs to paradise. Here's one photo. Again, it's not your car, but it looks just like your car. This is a photo of BioBeetle, one of the earliest adopters. They were the first to offer electric vehicles on Maui. And this is the Iao Valley in the back. And what we want to do is to get more pictures of EVs in paradise. But what we want to do today is talk about economics of EVs. You were an economist in the Treasury.
Yes, I worked for the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, U.S. Treasury, and ironically, of the cadre of people that was hired with me, I was the only economist.
You were the only economist.
Yeah, well, economics is a little bit different than finance. Everybody thinks it has to do with money. Economics talks about how we allocate our resources. And our resources are land and natural resources, all those stuff that's here, whether or not humans are. It's human labor, human input, whether it's physical labor or intellectual labor. And then capital equipment, which is all the things that humans have created. And surprisingly enough, in economics, money is not a resource. Money is merely the medium of exchange. And that's one of the big mental gymnastics pieces that you really have to take it, because if you look at the Maui economy, Adam Smith said that the wealth of a nation is based on the productive capacity of its people, not on the gold in the king's coffers. And that was such a radical idea for his time, but I see us going back to that same view, and so we discount the value of the labor that's part of our economic system, those resources that we have here.
Oh. So you're teaching this here at the college, economics, what's it called?
I teach microeconomics, macroeconomics, and an introductory course in economics. I also created a course of economics for artists and entrepreneurs.
Oh, wonderful. Is that on now?
Taught it last summer for the Institute of Hawaiian Music.
Fantastic.
It was a lot of fun because I brought in people from the community who actually worked in the business to talk about all of those aspects of becoming a self-supporting musician.
Fantastic. Well, I would love to talk to you more about that. Okay. So what we're going to do is, after the break, we're going to go into the economics of electric vehicles, in particular electric vehicle infrastructure. We'll be right back.
Would you like to attend college, but are afraid that you can't afford it?
You know, going to college was like something really hard because you had to have money and all that kind of stuff. And when I found that there was a financial aid application, I was, I felt very happy. I was willing to do whatever the application asked of me to.
Call or stop by the financial aid office at Maui College to discover how you can afford your college education.
Welcome back to Maui EVA TV. Today I have Ann Jenny, economist at Maui College and also teaching economics here at the college, and a leaf owner. Ann, Let's talk shop. Let's talk economics. There've been a lot of things that bothered me when I got into this project in November 2011. And not just that it's an emerging technology, emerging market, but also we're talking about infrastructure investment. We're asking people, you know, to dish out thousands of dollars to put in the charging infrastructure, sometimes even before they even know what an electric vehicle looks like, okay? And to comply with the state EV parking law, which is if you have at least 100 parking spaces that are available for public use, you've got to put a designated EV parking stall and charging access there. So let's talk about infrastructure, economics of that. And let's go into disruptive technology. I mean, why do I feel this kind of confusion and quizzical ponderance, so to speak?
Well, let's look at the internal combustion engines as a disruptive technology. When you look at what happened with the way that we sort of expanded that across the country or around the world, that was extraordinarily disruptive. I mean, horses were scared of it. It put businesses out of business. All of a sudden, you had to have parking for these vehicles. You know, you can tie 7 or 8 horses up to a hitching post, and that may be a space to park one vehicle. Again, they were rich man's toys until Ford, and that whole infrastructure development was really pushed, not necessarily by the state, but by the demand of the people who wanted to use automobiles. There's a number of things that are sort of required for a society to function effectively. And as we've moved to more and more progressive societies, it's moved from just mere food and clothing and shelter to healthcare, education, transportation, energy, and communications. Okay, so all of those 8 things are kind of the basic necessity for a society to function. And we have chosen not to attempt to develop the public transit infrastructure, the trains, the buses, the trolleys, those type of things. In fact, there was a concerted effort to get rid of them. If you look at the freeway system in Los Angeles, all of those freeways are based on the trunk lines for what used to be called the Red Line, which had been at one point the finest public transit system in the world. But General Motors, Goodyear, and I think probably Ford got together and convinced the city that to tear those out, to actually so that they could make more money selling tires, cars, and gasoline. You know, so you know, it's who's going to allow access to the commons, you know, our common infrastructure, our common resources, and who gets to profit from it.
Right. So actually, going back to disruptive technology and infrastructure, there's great resistance and change because people get used to the way they did things. Right. And it takes a lot of money to change things, right, to put in investment. So you're saying it's for the rich, so to speak, initially.
It can be.
Initially,
yeah. Well, if you look at the first airplanes,
right,
they were all rich men's toys.
Right.
Well, actually a lot of women were pilots in the early years too, almost equal there. But they were considered a rich person's toy. Right. And it wasn't until the contracts with the U.S. government for the Postal Service that it actually began to become cost effective for aircraft.
So basically initially it's very expensive and then costs come down, technology improves and everybody can afford it. So we're facing that right now because we have an infrastructure for gas cars or internal combustion engine, ICE cars, so to speak, but not for electric cars. And talking about disruptive technology, it's disruptive in that it actually changes your behavior after you use it. So once you have the EV, the way you tank up, so to speak, is different from the way you used to do it with your gas car, the way you behave.
In some ways, the EV can free you.
Can free you.
Because our when was it? With the leaking underground storage tank regulations from the EPA, many small gasoline dealers went out of business. So we lost that competitive market. Okay, we now have we have essentially an oligopoly in oil production and gasoline distribution. You know, look at we only have several, only very few resources. So there's not a competitive market in that. And anytime you begin to single source anything that's a necessity, and transportation and energy costs are definitely one of the 8 necessities for society, the prices end up being artificially inflated. Okay, it doesn't cost any more these days to drill for oil than it did 20 years ago, right? But our oil prices, between the speculation in the oil market and the consolidation of the oil companies, is primarily what has driven oil costs as high as they are. Okay.
So basically going electric.
Going electric, I'm in the process of using an open source collaborative group to design and build my solar powered charging station.
Wonderful.
So yeah, it's going to cost me some money, but it frees me from being tied to somebody else's profit.
Because at the heart of economics is choice, and choice comes from competition.
Yes, and there is not currently a free or competitive market in oil.
Right. So is that, going back to our list here, is that related to, which one would that be related to? High transaction costs right now, a lot of fuss basically to try to get that in place.
Right. Transaction cost is anything, an economic exchange is my exchanging something with you, right? We use money as a medium of exchange in our society, but anytime you add a middleman, and then if you add a profit motive on top of that, you add a transaction cost, because they have to get their pound of flesh, okay? Right. If you look at the gold rush, whether the Alaska gold rush or California gold rush, the only people that made out in those gold rushes were not the wildcatters that struck it rich. They were the sutters, the people that were supplying the goods and services. You could buy a fresh egg if you had $3. Now remember, in the 1800s, $3 was well over a week's wages for an average worker. Okay, so the people that made out in those type of things are the middlemen.
The middlemen. So the only way to overcome that is to disintermediate, which is what the internet does for information.
Absolutely.
You could get it yourself. You don't have to go to an insurance broker or a broker of information to get what you need.
And we have wind and solar that's available to all of us. We don't have to dig for it. We don't have to have, you know, major resources to get down to get it. So it allows individual choice as far as what energy source you're going to use.
So this explains the rush to solar here on Maui. As soon as people educate themselves and realize, hey, I could put solar on my roof. And a lot of people are going off grid as well, thinking I want to be independent, I can do it.
And there's been a big movement to go off grid for anybody that's even moderately technologically savvy for years. I mean, if you look at areas in Colorado, part of the Platte Valley and things, there are people that have never been on the grid. And it's almost like there's a technological jump point. When I was in Colombia almost 10 years ago, there were very few telephones.
Colombia as in South America, Colombia.
Yeah, as in Bogota, Colombia. Everybody had cell phones, right? So they jumped over the need for the managed infrastructure that's required for hardwired telephones and telephone poles and all that infrastructure, and went straight to the personal choice infrastructure.
Interesting, yeah.
And so the cell phone market there is much more competitive than it is here.
Well, speaking of cell phones, I mean, there's different plans, different rates. Relates to here what we call lack of interoperability, as we see now with all the different key fobs and, you know, the radio frequency identification, RFID, you know, cards that you need to access a charging station. We have ChargePoint, we have Better Place, we have AeroEnvironment here on Maui. We just wish, as EV drivers, there's just one key, you know. Now, why is that?
Well, I think there's two pieces of it. If we weren't trying to displace workers through the use of electronic stuff, like the way we don't have bank tellers anymore, we have ATM cards. The way we don't have gas station attendants. We have gas cards, all right? You know, I can go to a gas station and use my debit card, but then I can also use a gas card, right? Most of us have wallets full of cards, so I don't know that that's a really major issue as far as the whole thing goes. I realize, you know, having all these funky little key fobs, but if you, almost everybody's got a card now for something.
Right, so
So
it's not a major
I don't
issue.
really see that, and the interoperability, if it's 110 volt, I think the major interoperability question comes up with when we standardize, like VHS versus Beta.
Well, what's happening now with the CHAdeMO versus the SAE
Exactly.
combo standard, which is for European EVs, European American EVs, but there's going to be some convergence eventually.
Yeah, or you know, we'll just if we're going to ship our car to Europe, or European are going to ship his car here, they'll have the same adapters that we have for our hair
Adapters,
dryers.
yes.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem that big of a deal to me.
Right. So speaking of that, let's talk about property rights, asking for permission. Some of our EV drivers are complaining that, you know, when they get to a charging station, they have to ask, well, you know, how do I use it, or where is it? There's this need to ask for permission, sort of like you need to go to the restroom and you have to ask for permission. Sometimes you have to get a key, sometimes you have to be a customer. It's not clear, and definitely not for EVs yet, the public charging stations yet. And I call that property rights, because this equipment is on my property and I invest, I'm the property owner, I put that in. I want it for my customers.
And that brings me to a point, I think there's a mistake in putting it on commercial properties.
Yeah.
I think they should have gone into libraries, to churches, to schools, to public spaces.
Public spaces.
Public spaces more than private spaces.
As a priority, you
As
mean?
a priority. Definitely, because to me that gets back to the enclosure of the commons. And the tragedy of the commons is not that we overexploit resources. The idea of the tragedy of the commons comes out of an ecologist by the name of Garrett Hardin in the 60s. And he was talking about population crashes. Humans are a little different than, hopefully, than, you know, like the goats or something that overrun certain islands and things like that. We are sentient. We are subject to peer pressure and social pressures and things like that. So if you allow a group of humans to share a space, they usually tend to work things out. Okay, it's not like a herd of goats that's going to demolish everything until it's dead. Okay?
Right.
So the actual tragedy of the commons comes from when you enclose the commons, when you privatize the commons area, our common resources, our natural resources, and don't allow people access to that. All right. So that enclosure, anytime you keep people away from access to those resources, you keep them away from the opportunity to create wealth.
Right. So it's like setting boundaries so the source and the sink become...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it becomes finite, and then you would deplete the resources.
Right.
Is that what you mean?
So I'm not even talking about depletion of resources. I'm talking about the profit motive for those resources.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So by having it on a commercial property, the commercial property owner is thinking, how can I profit from this? If you have it in a public space, if you have it as a commons, I don't mind paying for the resource itself, but access to that resource then becomes much freer and much more available.
Right. Unless, of course, the commercial property owner has a philanthropic motive or social responsibility and feels, hey, because that happened to me. I parked my borrowed Leaf, had it charging, and then I went to Starbucks. You know, Starbucks, how do I put it? The hotel there isn't gaining from mine using their electricity, but there's no monitoring as well. So, you know.
Well, you know,
Yeah.
if they're providing a free service.
Free service, yeah.
The other point comes into it, though, that most of the commercial entities, the major commercial entities on the island, are not owned locally. Okay, so we have the money multiplier effect, that if offshore ownership is actually decreases economic viability of the community. There's a variety of mathematical observations, and you can actually pinpoint and measure that.
Right.
So
if
I
the
don't have a whole lot of sympathy for that.
But if the charging stations are free for the public to use, or
That
below
just means
cost,
that we're getting access to our energy resources.
our energy resource, that'll be okay.
Yeah.
Right. Because I'm thinking about if it were at a school or church, who's going to pay for that? And who's going to monitor that? You know, and the whole thing about, you know, the freeloader principle, the free rider principle is people just go and use it and use it and use it, and the polluter doesn't pay, the user doesn't pay.
Well, the polluter doesn't pay principle, if you look at it, the major polluters are corporate interests. And I realize, you know, we all laughed at Romney when he said corporations are people, my friends. They are in the eyes of the law, but they're not sentient, they're not human, right? So, and they are required by law to make a profit, right? So when they're decision making, you're acting in your own best interest. If law says I have to make a profit, then I'm going to do whatever it takes to make a profit first.
Right.
As a human being, you know, if I'm out at the beach, I always see people cleaning it up, taking care of it. You know, that idea that this is common good, common resources. The idea of a free rider is not that it's exploitive, but it's not profitable.
It's not profitable, right.
Okay.
I suppose true free ridership would be if you don't take care of it. You know, you're not accountable for it, so you break it or something. You use it and you break it and you go away.
There tends to be two different sort of social perspectives. One is that human beings are inherently bad and need to be controlled. The other is that human beings, if you give them a chance, are generally good. Okay, and I don't find too much crossover in people, and that kind of an attitude. So, but generally, you know, I find, you know, and I've lived all over the world, that if I go to somebody and say, "Can you please help me?" or I need something. I've never had, I lived in Korea in the midst of a revolution, for crying out loud.
Let's get back to that, because this goes back to property rights, asking for permission. Not everybody feels empowered or entitled to ask for, you know, to ask. They just, but anyway, so how about this? After the break, we'll come back and wrap up the economics of EVs, and then we'll start going into our report, which we put together and submitted to the Department of Energy. We'll be right back after this. Thanks.
Kenana mai nei o ko UHMC TV, ka punai vele kiwi o ke kula nui o Maui.
Welcome back to Maui Electric Vehicle Alliance, or Maui EVA for short. I'm with Ann Jenny, economist at the UH Maui College and teaching economics. We were talking about economics of EVs, and we talked briefly about property rights, having to ask for permission. I mean, just basically a lot of fuss right now with EVs because it's not very clear. I mean, the other day I was talking to someone about how, you know, there's a gas car parked in an EV spot. You know, that means we got to tell somebody, and who's going to enforce that, right? And actually, come July, you'll get a $50 ticket. So we're going to talk to the chief of police about that to make sure that that definitely happens. But then if you're a gas car, you feel, well, I've got the right. I mean, I don't see any EVs around, so I'll just park there. So let's talk about information asymmetry, because, you know, when you talk about secondhand cars, a good example would be I, as the buyer of a secondhand car, I know I have less information than you do as the owner, hence the lemons market, right?
Right.
But with new cars, there's always this warranty that levels the whole symmetry of information. How else does that apply to a nascent EV, emerging technology, emerging market as we have here on Maui?
Well, the first piece of that, anytime there's an information asymmetry, there's a power differential. And part of what you're doing here with the EVA Maui is to help break that down. But it is incumbent on the marketing, the marketplace, to understand that a truly competitive market requires a fully informed buyer and a fully informed seller. And as much as I enjoyed the gentleman that I bought my car from, I knew more about electronics than he did. And I haven't worked in the field in 30 years, you know, so.
That's unusual, because usually the seller knows more than the buyer.
Exactly.
So you're saying here with EVs, the buyers of EVs know more than the sellers?
Well, and that is not unusual for early adopters.
Okay.
Because we're attracted to this because it clicks into some sort of information set that we've got,
Okay.
or something that we're curious about.
Right.
The secondary level, you know, the pyramid for adoption of technologies, that's, what do they call that center group? The bell curve of adopters. Anyway, but you know, when the bulk of the people start adopting it, they're going to be relying primarily on hearsay. So that's where the information asymmetries are going to probably cause more problems.
We do get a lot of hearsay.
Yeah.
Especially here on Maui, this 1 degree of separation.
Yeah. And, you know, we're an oral culture.
Right.
So we're used to talking story with people. The problem is, the idea of talk story is you get to know somebody before you go into a deal with them.
It's trust.
That's
how
so
we
building up the
establish
trust, right. And that trust issue is going to be critical. So the more that we can direct people to trustworthy sources, beyond the salesperson.
Well, see, this is interesting. Buyers of EVs tend to know more than the sellers, but yet it's the reverse for charging stations. The manufacturers of charging stations, the installers, they know a lot more about charging station because they come from somewhere else where it's more established than the property owners here. They're putting in, right?
Right.
So, and plus that's a big investment for something that you don't know will get used.
Well, and are the property owners are in some ways being coerced into installing these things. If it had been opened up to the community and said, hey, who wants to be on the leading edge of this? You know, if you had offered a subsidy for it or something like that, or assistance, or, you know, some way to do that, and said, you know, who is interested in providing this service to your community? I think you would have had a very different approach to it. You would have had early adopters like me. You probably would have had one at the Institute for Astronomy.
So basically you're saying the framing of the question has to be changed. This is very akin to the NIMBY, the not in my backyard syndrome. In the UK, you know, trying to put in wind farms, windmills and all that, it's very different from, say, in Denmark, where it's a community-based. You know, farmers get together, say, okay, we're going to do it.
Right.
So it has to be this community thing. But that's how I hear solar is going. Solar farms or solar communities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And again, the way our tax structure is set up, though, it is designed to benefit MECO. It is not designed to benefit the average consumer, because if it was, they would be giving tax credits for battery systems. Instead, you don't get a tax credit if you have a battery system. You have to be hooked into the single point grid. And it would have made far more sense to, okay, if you insist on excess going into the grid, that you have multi-point grids. Because there's something called economies of scale, that it gets cheaper as it gets bigger, but there's also a diseconomy of scale. And in an era of climate change, and, you know, where we have a single point of vulnerability at one power station, you look at what's happening in the Northeast right now, and that single point, that single failure point, you know, there are people it's what, 10 degrees there today, and there are people that haven't had heat since the hurricane hit. You know, and we don't have to face that crisis, but it makes sense to have a distributed network rather than a single point source network.
I think we're going in that direction, don't you think, with distributed generation?
Not as long as you have a sole an institution.
A monopoly.
Yeah, monopoly.
Right.
And it's a for-profit monopoly.
In order to stay in business, in order to survive.
No, it doesn't need to be a for-profit to stay in order to survive.
Okay. So let's talk about collaborative consumption. I love that word. I didn't realize I was already doing it. When you rent out rooms in your house, classic cases, Airbnb out of San Francisco, you know, trying to procure scarce space, right? And when it's not being used, why can't somebody else use it?
Exactly.
Another one is renting a car, or car sharing is even better. We're talking about space, use transportation.
Right.
I suppose timeshare with condos, that's a similarity too. Collaborative consumption or ride sharing, let's talk about that. How does that pertain to electric vehicles?
Well, if we had an infrastructure established that was actually primarily a ride-sharing system, the idea of the charging stations would be moot, because you would have the charging stations at the aggregate points. And because the ride share is definitely a distributed system, you only want to drive the car at certain distances or certain places or certain points, it takes the range questions out of it. And it would have been a much more efficient, it would have been much more effective use of common resources. And I think you would have had a lot of people who might be hesitant about the price point of, I'm not sure exactly how expensive they were, but that's why I leased mine. But, you know, okay, I can try it out.
Right.
I tried to rent a Leaf months before because Enterprise had some in Oahu, but they were only renting them out to certain people.
Oh.
Right. They, you know, something to do with the university. I don't know what that had to do with anything, but I couldn't rent one.
You couldn't rent one.
But if there was a ride share, and first of all, most people don't use their cars, you know, efficiently. So a ride share is that efficient use of it. But collaborative consumption is just as simple as the average power tool is used 10 minutes a year. You know, so if I have a you know, electric drill, right, and my neighbors need to use it, does it make sense for all 8 of us to own that?
Share it.
Right.
Except the problem is the wear and tear, right? It would degrade faster if more people used it more frequently.
It's around here it's going to rust sitting in my toolbox.
Okay, it's going to degrade anyway.
Right.
So might as well
over
use
time.
it over time.
But then you get to the question of commercial vehicles versus privately owned vehicles. If you look at the way a commercial truck is built versus the way a passenger truck is built, you know, just a consumptive truck, most businesses would be upset if they only got 50,000 miles out of a vehicle. So the manufacturers hold some responsibility for that as well. You know. The other thing is you can design a vehicle that, you know, we design buses and all sorts of things that people use all the time and for long. So that design question comes in the beginning, and it shouldn't be something that we have to deal with on the other side. And again, it's are we designing this for a ride share or for collaborative consumption, or just to sit as somebody's trophy?
Well, so basically you're saying that when you basically want to optimize the usage of something before it dies, so to speak. Of course, there's other issues such as, you know, if I let you use it, then, you know, suppose it gets dirty, I'm responsible, right? The whole wear and tear thing, and also transaction costs. I need to find that person. There has to be some system in place where after I use it, you can use it.
Right.
You know, right now, unless there's a third party doing that, it's hard for me to.
Well, that's
kind
what
of
that
share.
you use the example of Airbnb,
Right.
And that is a perfect example of what the internet has brought us.
Disintermediation.
Disintermediation.
So
yes, and the trust piece of it comes in. If I transact business on eBay or something, I get responses as to how well I transacted that, and
feedback.
That feedback, we have a built-in trust mechanism, And
so we have a mechanism for allowing trust between strangers,
Exactly.
which is collaborative consumption,
Exactly.
why it would take place. Okay, let's talk about that further right after this break.
okay.
Have you been thinking about attending college but believe you may not be eligible for financial aid?
Well, at first, kind of felt a little bit afraid, maybe because I won't be eligible, but I was pretty eligible. I got some good grant to help me through my first year.
To find out which types of financial aid you may be eligible for, call or stop by the financial aid office at Maui College today.
Welcome back to Maui EVA. We're now in the last section of Economics of EVs with Ann Jenny, economist at Maui College, who also teaches economics here. Just briefly, which economics courses are you teaching or will be teaching? Or have
I
taught?
get to be totally subversive and teach the introductory courses.
All right, that's hard because you're basically trying to
I'm teaching the
introduce
language and
new
the
stuff.
assumptions and the understandings, yes.
I took intro to micro and macroeconomics when I was an undergraduate one summer, and that just changed my whole worldview. It's like, oh my gosh, it sounds like common sense, but there's vocabulary to it, and it makes sense now. So let's review the different terms we talked about just now. We started with, well, the last thing we did was collaborative consumption, which is basically, how would you define that?
I would define that as taking advantage of all of the downtime of our resources, rather than leaving it sort of sit in the drawer and moldering away. We're actually using it and taking advantage of what's available.
That's good. And that translates to car sharing, ride sharing, car rental, in terms of EV. Policy resistance, we didn't get to talk about that. I'm going to save that for a future episode on systems thinking. Information asymmetry, so where the buyer knows more than the seller, which is in buying EVs. EV buyers tend to be savvy right now, but traditionally the buyer knows less than the seller.
And it also comes to what actually creates a competitive market is a fully informed buyer and a fully informed seller.
Right, and I've been told that Nissan Leaf does not have any printed brochures.
No.
Everything is online, because I had a question from someone asked me, how can I find out about the Nissan Leaf? It's just Google it, it's everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Economy of scale, how would you define that?
That's relatively simple. It tends to be that the larger an entity is, the more efficient it is. But there is definitely an upper limit to that. I could have a large restaurant and I keep putting more tables in and I'm going to make more money, I can serve more customers. But there comes a finite point where if I add one more table, it's actually going to degrade the restaurant experience for my customers, and it's going to actually decrease my income. So as things get bigger and more complex, oftentimes what is required to produce that gets lost in the complexity.
Right, so basically in order to get to economy of scale, the marginal cost of producing an extra unit should be less than the previous unit, so to speak. And this is why we need more people to buy EVs so that we can make more of them and get to that. It's not like hand making the first one and the second one, and then eventually being able to make them faster and more.
And you do also have to take into account marginal benefit.
Marginal benefit.
As well. We tend to focus on costs. And there is a benefit, and usually the marginal incremental margin at the beginning, you're getting more benefit, and that benefit decreases. And so at a certain point, then the benefit the cost outweighs the benefit.
Outweighs the benefit. Good. That's another topic cost and benefit analysis. We'll have to save that for later. We talked about interoperability to be able to use the same key fob for different charging stations, and we didn't mention that one of the reasons that it doesn't work right now is because the manufacturers aren't willing to share their data with someone else. So for you to access my system, I have to allow you access to my interface and data and protocols. But you didn't think that was a big issue?
It's like I said, it's like VHS and beta, and I don't know if you ever remember mini discs.
Oh,
yeah. There's a lot of technologies out there, and if you're trying to, the profit motive wants you to keep it proprietary.
Proprietary, right.
And once things settle out, then all of a sudden it'll be
so the biggest case is the fast charger access. We have the CHAdeMO, so it was really a race against time, the need for speed. So the Japanese, Mitsubishi, and Nissan, they're able to, you know, do that. And now the European cars and American cars are now saying we want the SAE combo standard. But right now, at this moment, we haven't seen it yet.
Right. The market demand is what's going to drive
market demand is going to drive that.
We've heard the phrase supply-side economics for all those years, and that really has no, it doesn't make any sense when you talk in economic terms. It's the market demand that drives development.
That's why you have to hurry up and get there.
Exactly.
Basically. Okay, externalities and tragedy of the commons. How would you define an externality?
There's a really clear definition in economics. An externality, you and I have engaged in a transaction, all right? An external cost to that transaction or an external benefit to that transaction is a cost or benefit that is gained or borne by somebody who's not sitting here at the table with us. Okay, so we have our conversation, as much as I'm enjoying this exchange and I'm learning something and hopefully you're learning something, there's an external benefit because we've agreed to post this, and hopefully other people will benefit.
So the audience benefits.
The audience is benefiting. They're not paying me for this, right? They're not paying you for this, but they're gaining information from that. That's an external benefit, all right? External costs would be, you know, if you and I have a transaction and we break something that somebody else has to pay for.
Right.
My cost, your benefit does not take into account that breakage.
That's good. That's a very important word. And then just three more: property rights, having to ask for permission or somebody owns it. I mean, it's just the right of way, so to speak. High transaction costs because there's a lot of, well, unwritten rules right now. And then finally, we talked about disruptive technology and that of emerging market and that EV infrastructure. It's infrastructure. It's hard to change once you put it down.
Right.
So there's a lot of concerns about that, thinking about that, and information that has to be discovered and revealed. Well, thank you, Anne.
You're quite welcome.
For this wonderful discussion, economics of electric vehicles. And I'm going to ask Anne to stay for the remaining section. We're going to go into our report, EVs in Paradise, planning for the infrastructure development for electric vehicles for Maui. Right after this, so please stay with us, and we're going to give you highlights of our report. Thank you.
Discover your future through learning. With a Bachelor's of Applied Science degree, you'll be prepared for a career in the field of sustainable science management, engineering and technology, or applied business and information technology. Create sustainable communities. Engineer the next generation of technology. Develop the business expertise to succeed in a dynamic economic environment. Apply now at the University of Hawaii Maui College.
The Bachelor's of Applied Science and Engineering Technology at Maui College provides curriculum and training in electronics, computers, optics, remote sensing, and other technologies.
I always messed with video games and televisions and computers, so it's always something I really wanted to work with, throughout my life.
I always had a fascination with electronics, and then because I was in the associate's degree, that also motivated me to do the bachelor's degree.
This degree prepares graduates to be productive professionals who can make meaningful contributions to industry in Maui County, the state of Hawaii, and the world.
Well, I especially like the hands-on experience that we get and the hands-on learning that we receive.
You don't need to leave home to do it.
For me, it means that it's affordable. I can stay here on Maui.
If you would like more information on how to apply to this program, call the Educational Opportunity Center at 984-3286 or visit us online at maui.hawaii.edu.
Welcome back to this last segment of today's 10th episode of Maui Electric Vehicle Alliance, Maui EVA TV for short. I'm afraid we've run out of time to go into the report. That's going to be our next show. So today we're going to give you a short preview. The title of our report is EVs in Paradise, Planning for the Development of Electric Vehicle Infrastructure in Maui County. And I have Ann Jenny with us to give us a quick preview. This was the basically our deliverable under our grant from the Department of Energy, and this is public releasable, which means everyone can download it from the internet. We also have a whole section of attachments or appendices, which are hopefully useful for planners and EV buyers, infrastructure people, and rule makers. So, Anne, you've had a chance to read the entire 105-page report. It's 10 chapters. We start with introduction. Then we talk about the different stakeholders and the whole stakeholder process. How do we engage everyone? It's a bottom-up approach, trying to engage everyone. And then we go into barriers to EV readiness and benefits and incentives. Why would people want to do it? EV deployment, in other words, how to get higher EV penetration or mass adoption. Deploying charging infrastructure is about putting in charging stations, so hence the chicken or the egg question. Do you get EVs first or do you put in charging stations first? And hopefully people knowing that will buy EVs or rent EVs. The utility grid, chapter 7, is a big chapter, and I like to get our viewers to watch episode 8, in which I interview MECO's Matt McNeff on that. And local ordinances, chapter 8, is all about permitting, zoning, building codes, other issues you need to know. And then chapter 9, outreach and education. I think we've done a lot of outreach since November 11th when we first started on this with National Plug-in Day, the Maui County Fair. Now we have our EV newsletter, and anyone can subscribe to that. Just go to our mauieva.org page and you can see the link. Education in terms of workforce training. And finally, we summarize all the recommendations in each chapter under, we rearrange that by stakeholder. For example, state and federal level, county level, utility, and all that in chapter 10. And then we have a list of charging stations on Maui. So having read this, which is the best chapter for, you see that people can start reading? Do you start from beginning and read to the end, or just take out one particular chapter?
Part of the issue of reading a report like this, I realized it was your deliverable, what you had to do for the grant. It's much more effective if you're trying to change a community, to have the community sitting and talking about it. When you're doing community organizing work, particularly on something that's going to be as disruptive as this kind of technology, the more voices who are not professionals, you know, the more kapuna, the more students, the more whoever that you have as part of the discussion, because when you talk to the stakeholders that you identified, and granted they are primary stakeholders, but they all have an institutional interest, and I think the discussion needs to broaden over all of the issues that you have in your chapters. So I don't know how that would work. So I don't know that reading it, but maybe reading it in a book study type format or something.
So maybe what we could do is, I think this document basically is the result of an inquiry, an investigation.
Right.
And
It's a research paper.
Research paper. So now if we put it together, we see the whole elephant rather than one part of it, so to speak. And what we've done recently was to have different groups come together and talk about their areas. So you're suggesting we should broaden it.
Exactly.
So that's the last stage, stage 4 of our stakeholder building, which is new stakeholders. And also, we're trying to do a meetup dinner to just have people get together and really do talk story rather than talk at.
Right.
You know, our seminars are more talk at. The expert talks at the audience, but we want to make it level. We could all talk.
And you know, anytime you're trying to change a social system, you can't change it from the outside.
No.
It's got to be changed from the inside.
Inside. So what we'll do is to make this report available so at least people can have a starting point.
Yeah, that is helpful.
Yeah, and we have, 4 or 5 pages of bibliography, just links to useful resources. But I must admit, you don't want to read a 100-page report, you know, every day. No, unless you're an economist like yourself.
I'm used to writing these things. So
it's not a big deal.
Not a big deal.
I must say, we tried our best to write it in such a way that it's accessible.
It is.
Yeah, it's easy reading. We're aiming at, say, 8th grade level, or
It wasn't jargony.
It wasn't jargony. Yeah. We ripped out all the nitty-gritty, difficult words and you know, stuff and put it in the appendix.
Well, usually, and I was really glad that you did that. Too often, people try to obfuscate things, and again, that is antithetical to a free market where fully informed buyer and fully informed seller, and the not necessarily simplistic. But to be able to understand what's going on is the only way that I can make an informed decision.
Absolutely. So what we're going to do is, this is just trying to go through, talk about all these at a future episode. I'm trying to go to the last section, not recommendations here. Where does it go? Here, for more information. For more information, visit our website, and we'll be on every Saturday and Sunday, 5 o'clock, 11 o'clock, Hawaiian time. You could get it from the main Maui College website. I just want to quickly show that. You literally do this, mauihawaii.edu, and you go down the middle after Welcome to Maui College and click on MCTV live stream, and oops, this came up, and you should be able to just see, and that's how it works. You could watch us live, watch this show live rather than digital TV, and then and also on YouTube. So thanks very much, Anne.
Oh, thank you.
Anne Jenny, economist, and Anne Koo, both Annes. And we'll be back at a future episode to go through the entire report. Thank you for watching, and visit our website.